Now, brain fried numbers things, week-long 5090 testing video. Time to talk about card monies and not bad stuff. I promised you guys when I did the initial Lightning unboxing and kind of just a surface level touching of the card that I would do a full in-depth review of it. And I figured the only way to truly test it is to compare it against the other Titan class cards that exist today. So I have literally spent every spare moment of the last week, including the weekend, dozens of hours testing just these four cards. The 5090 FE from NVIDIA, the 5090 Lightning Z from MSI, the 5090 Astral from ASUS, and the 5090 Matrix from ASUS. The only two cards I was truly interested in this review was the Lightning versus the Matrix, because both of these have very high-end BIOSes with very high power limits. The FE, as you know, is a 575 watt card that has a 4% additional power limit available to us, which will bring us up to 600 watts, which is how I ran it in these tests. The Lightning has two BIOS, an 800 watt and a 1000 watt BIOS that we were switched, obviously, to the 1000 watt BIOS. The Astral is a 600 watt card and 600 watt card only. The Matrix is also a 600 or 800 watt card, depending on whether or not you have both power connectors plugged in. Now, I'm gonna talk about today's video in a more experiential format, where I wanna talk about what the nuances of these cards was like. Obviously, I've got a lot of line charts, I've got a lot of bar charts that we're gonna show on here, and when it comes to the bar charts, when we get to that point of the video, we're just gonna show them for a few seconds each. I don't know however long Phil puts them on screen. Pause and look at them, and we'll talk about some of the weirdness that you're gonna see in the deep dive that it took to figure out what was happening and why there were some things that on the surface looked very much like errors, but the errors weren't on my part. The errors was on their part. So we'll talk about that in a second here. But quickly, the Founders card, I did not overclock in these tests, but obviously I overclocked the Astral, the Lightning, and the Matrix, because all three of those are built for extreme overclocking. The Astral maybe not as much as the others because it's a single plug card, but they're built for overclocking and pushing and squeezing as much out of that core as you possibly can. The Founders Edition card, I've watched enough of Northwest Fix's videos to know you really shouldn't push that card. You really shouldn't overclock it. And so I didn't. I used it more so as a 5090 baseline to show what the type of performance uplift you can see from these models are above the MSRP card. Now let's talk about pricing here real quick. The 5090 is a 2000, and all of these prices are in quotes, by the way, because those are the MSRPs, but you know as well as I do, from day to day, the pricing is different on these cards. They go up and down and all over the place. It's literally like it's a buoy bobbing in the ocean. But MSRP of $2,000 for the 5090. MSRP of about $3,300 for the Astral OC. $3,999 for the Matrix, and $5,090 for the Lightning Z. So as you can see, we are talking 2.5 times the cost of a 5090 FE for the Lightning. And obviously, you don't even need to watch the rest of this video to know that is not worth it. It is absolutely not worth getting the Lightning Z over any other 5090 model, unless you just absolutely are into all of the super limited edition carbon fiber here and there, dual plugs, 1000 watt BIOS, etc. But there are some caveats to that, and we'll talk about where the Lightning Z might make perfect sense towards the end of this video. With that said, the testing methodology here is the same as before, but all retested. The 5090 was retested, and we've added another title to this. I told you we'd be adding more titles over time. I'm probably gonna start adding Resident Evil Requiem on here as well. Requiem, however you pronounce it. Probably gonna add Red Dead Redemption 2 back on. We haven't talked about that in forever. I've got Baldur's Gate 3 in here, which is an interesting title. We try to just get different engines all over the place. Initially, I was gonna do Vulkan with Baldur's Gate. The problem is we use PresentMon from Intel to capture frame times and FPS and all that. However, it doesn't capture Vulkan, it doesn't hook Vulkan. So I had to use DX11 for that. So just know if you're running Vulkan with Baldur's Gate 3, your performance and such might look very different than what you're gonna see here. But think of this as a dyno for a car. As long as we run whatever test we choose exactly the same on each one of our cards, the comparison between them is what matters. We're not benchmarking the title, we're benchmarking the card. Now it's important to note that I did both overclocked and out-of-the-box settings when it comes to these cards. So I figured out each card's nuance of overclocking and found its max stable, minus the FE. I didn't overclock that card. Never overclock an FE, it's just not safe. And yes, it included the Lightning Z's screen plugged in and working exactly as a consumer would buy it and plug it in and run it. So with that said, Phil, go ahead and put since this is literally the battle of the bands, if you will, put on some epic metal music, something that even might get Steve's attention. I know, I feel like I could hear Steve's hair whipping like Beavis and Butthead from across the country. Okay, you might have noticed some very strange looking benchmarks on here. And the first thing you might have noticed is the fact that the Lightning just doesn't seem to be holding its own on the charts like you might expect. When it comes to overclocking, you'll notice that there's overclock numbers on these charts as well as standard out-of-the-box performance on these charts. These cards out of the box will try to stay right around the 600 watt or less and about 50 megahertz, maybe thereabouts, which is funny because just about every 5090 will do that. But let's talk about when it comes to power limits here for a second. The 5090 and the Astral absolutely are limited to 600 watts or less because they are single 12 volt 2x6 connector cards. Without these having multiple cables for them, adding any wattage is dangerous at all. And just because these other cards, the Matrix and the Lightning, have two 12 volt 2x6 connectors does not mean they're any more safe. We've seen people limit their cards to 500 watts or less and still melt cables. So unfortunately, the dual cable is a nice to have, but I don't think it's the perfect answer for not melting your card, especially when you consider the fact that the least amount of power available to the Lightning Z is 800 watts. Now, as I talked about with the Matrix here, you get 600 watts if you have either the 12 volt 2x6 or the BTF connector plugged in. But since I have this nifty little adapter right here, which took a while to get, and it came all the way from China, it literally converts the BTF to a 12 volt 2x6, allowing me to have two 12 volt 2x6s connected to the card in a safe manner rather than tricking the card into pulling 800 watts through a single connector, which is how I initially performed that video. I was using this adapter to be able to do that. Now here's the downside with this adapter. You might be looking at that going, Jay, where can I get that? Oh my gosh, where can I get that? Just know, the moment you attach this to the bottom of the card with the adapter that's on the bottom for BTF, it gets pretty tall, and it's actually taller than the plane of the PCI Express connector, which means you cannot use it on your motherboard. It absolutely will impact the motherboard or anything else before it hits that. Potentially with a riser cable and a vertical mount, you could, but now you're gonna see on the back, you're gonna have the connector and the cable running across your backplate. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it is sort of a band-aid maneuver that ASUS came up with to allow people that aren't running BTF motherboards or ASUS motherboards with BTF connectors to be able to run that card and still unlock the full 800 watt potential. One thing I haven't tested yet, and I'm going to because I'm really curious, is the card that I'm using for the Astral is also a BTF card, but I did not use the BTF connector. I used the standard 12 volt 2x6, but what I'm curious now is if, just like the Matrix, if I was to plug this in, I know that they're connected to the same power plane. would that now split the 600 watts between the cables, making them each 300 watts, which would be a lot safer than, say, running 2 cables on 1,000 watts or 800 watts. So it makes me feel like the Astral with this adapter and a vertical mount that can clear it might be the safest way to run a 5090 and not necessarily melt your stuff. Haven't tested that yet. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't work considering the Matrix does it. So I just didn't have time. Like I said, I literally spent, if I had to guess, I probably spent at least 30, 35 hours testing these cards because there was a lot of retesting, especially when it comes to the overclocking side, because I would get to what I felt like was a really stable overclock, get halfway through my test, have something crash, do a restart, make sure it wasn't just a one-off crash, and then if it continues happening, I have to reduce the clocks, go back to the beginning and start again. I've since learned start with the title that tends to crash the most to figure out the safe overclock, and then I'll spend a lot less time restarting. So with that said, let's go ahead and talk about some of the weirdness. If we look at Black Myth, you are going to see that the Lightning Z has absolutely horseshit 1% lows. And that was what made me initially go, what the heck is going on here? The 1% lows on Black Myth for the Lightning Z was basically equivalent to what the minimum FPS, remember we don't use minimum FPS, that would just be what's the lowest one frame and how long did it take to draw it, that's your minimum FPS, right? It was like equal to what the other card's minimum FPS was. Now that's just not right. Something is not right there. And I did lots of testing, I did DDU, I did reinstalling, and then it dawned on me. We've got a screen on this graphics card that is a 720 by, I can't remember resolution, Phil can put it on the screen, but it's basically a 19, I think it's a 1280 by 7 something, I don't remember, I just don't remember. Phil can put it on the screen, but that is a USB-C connection to a USB-A on the motherboard. It is not a USB-C DisplayPort connection or anything like that. It is literally a data cable. The card is rendering the screen, but it's connecting to the system via that cable. So what we started testing and really trying to figure out here is the screen impacting performance in some way? So if we go ahead and now move from Black Myth 4K, and if you look at Black Myth 1440, the 1%'s come up a lot closer, right? So if you look at 4K, which is it's very hard to run. I'm not running DLSS I am running a 66% upscaler, but Black Myth is a very difficult benchmark to run, and that's why I like it. Because it exposes stuff like this, where if something is impacting the GPU performance, even a little bit, it's going to show, and allows us to then drill down into why is that happening. But if you look up at 1440p Black Myth, you can see it comes a lot closer, where it's 91.4 stock on the 1% low, but that's obviously quite a bit lower than the 99 for the Astral or the 104 for the Matrix or even the 109 for the overclocked Astral. So it's still being impacted, but not as much because 1440p is an easier load for the card. So if we take a look at something like Cyberpunk though, which is not a tracked benchmark, if you will, it's not on a track, it's an actual game that's being tested here. If you look at the 1440p chart here, you'll see that I did a screen and a no screen. And with the no screen on, we picked up 12 FPS on our 1% low without the screen plugged in at all. That was what made me then go, okay, let's take a look at the frame times. So if we take a look at frame times on Cyberpunk 1440p, the first one we're gonna show here is what the frame time looks like, and that's how long in milliseconds it took to draw each frame. So frames per second and frame time are the same thing. They're just two different displays of how that frame is being drawn. How many were drawn versus how long it took to draw. And then you could divide that by how many milliseconds there are in a second, and then that's how you get FPS. It's literally all that's happening. So you can see it looks pretty normal as we are walking down the street. But moving on, that's with the screen unplugged. That exact same test, same exact settings, same card, same out of the box and everything. If we plug the screen back in and we have the data on the screen, it's using Lightning Hub, it's got its own server on the card. We've already talked about that when we did our initial review. It's got its own driver to run the screen. This is what the frame times look like. And you see a very consistent interval of a very slow frame to be drawn. And what that's done is pulled down our average because our 1% low drops because each one of those frames are taking so long to draw, it is literally yanking the entire average down. It's kind of like the bell curve, only you're on the wrong end of it. So we realized the screen is what's actually affecting performance of this card across the board. Now, not all titles are affected by it as badly as others. But if we look at Borderlands 3, which is a very high FPS, like Borderlands 3 and 1440p, I mean, the Matrix overclocked is pulling 324 average FPS with 250.81% lows. But if we look at the Lightning Z overclocked, it's right behind it, but still 233.91% low versus 250.8. Now, what's funny is, when you look at the averages though, the averages don't come up much when you disconnect the screen, but the 1% lows do. Now here's the thing, I wanna talk about perceived smoothness because it wasn't until I inputted the data in my spreadsheets and then started formulating whenever I'm doing my testing, I always do a sanity check on every single resolution when I finish that resolution run and compare it to neighboring cards to see, does this look within range of where it should be landing or is something just way off? And the first thing I noticed obviously was that things were way off. So I had to start deep diving and to figure out what was happening here. So the reason why having it be a USB instead of some sort of a USB-C display port or anything like that is the fact that what's happening here, we don't know exactly the process, but we know it's a data stream that is coming over that cable, not a video stream. So what's happening is the card is having to basically unpack that data that's being sent, we're assuming by the CPU, we think, rather than happening on the card with its own encoder. I mean, I'd love for MSI engineers to chime in and tell us how this is working because we don't know exactly how. But obviously we showed you on that line chart, those interval spikes. Those spikes tend to kind of correlate with every time that screen is updating. In fact, you'll notice there's a couple that are missing in that interval. The screen doesn't update perfectly every time. Probably because the GPU becomes so busy, it just goes, screen, you need to wait. This is more important, and then it catches back up and on the next interval cycle on updating the data on the screen. But what's happening is either the CPU or something non-GPU is packing that data, sending that data over USB-C, and then the GPU is having to unpack that data, extrapolate it, and then put it on the dashboard. So that's why you're seeing that crazy interval. That's literally the polling rate at which the screen is being updated. We've seen this before though. This is one of the reasons why Precision X from EVGA was a problem, because it did the same thing if you just had it up, because the software was polling the GPU for its telemetry data, temperatures, power draw, all that sort of stuff. So the GPU had to put the game on pause for a second to handle the information that was being requested by the software. So we're kind of seeing that happen right here, and that's why the average and the 1% lows are so bad. If we look at Cyberpunk 4K, we're talking 32.31% low versus even the FE's 52.9. The slowest card on here has 20.6 FPS average 1% higher. That would be noticeable. But I didn't notice it, and I didn't feel it when playing the game. Otherwise, that's the kind of thing that would almost present itself as a bit of a stutter, like just a hitch as you're playing, and that would be very, very noticeable. Judder, micro stutter, people refer to it as different things. But I didn't feel it, and that's what really got me starting to figure out what was happening here. But in discussing this with Phil and just kind of bouncing off of him, he was like, well, it's only that one frame that's doing it. And because of the fact that we were talking 60 FPS versus 32, it wasn't massively, in fact, I don't think it's noticeable at all. But we are running a 144 hertz panel here. If we were running a 60 hertz panel, it might have been more noticeable because of just the frames that are being drawn on screen, and then just crazy alignment of that super slow frame might have presented itself as a judder on a 60 FPS panel here. So I'm not convinced that it's necessarily a super noticeable thing, but it's a thing happening regardless. When it comes to performance though, it's crazy because the 5090 Lightning Z at $5,090 is being beaten by the air-cooled 5090 Matrix that is over $1,000 less MSRP, I know. Which is kind of crazy to me. Now here's the other thing. Let's go ahead and talk about the line charts here, because it's got a 360 AIO, and when I overclock these cards, by the way, I do run their fans at 100%. So let's go ahead and take a look at core frequencies here real quick, because one of the reasons why the Matrix is beating the Lightning Z in pretty much every chart, I don't think the Matrix lost to the Lightning in anything at all. One, because of the frame, the perfect interval frame latency thing we're talking about here with the screen. And two, the Matrix clocks higher across the board at less power. And we'll show you that here in a second. But if we look at the core frequencies, the stock frequencies here, The colors are kind of weird, but I did that to represent the card. So red is the Matrix, yellow is the Lightning, purplish is the Astral, and then green is the NVIDIA card. So if we take a look at the stock frequencies, you can see the FE card bounced up to right around 2700. It kind of goes up a little bit above it, a little bit below it. And this is, again, using Cyberpunk 1440p, where the frequencies can go high and the card isn't, the card is definitely our bottleneck. It's our limiting factor of performance here, but it's not throttling itself down because of super high temps or super high power draw because of 4K and whatever. It's just kind of what I feel is like a good middle ground in a realistic scenario here, especially since we are running RT and no upscaling in Cyberpunk. So it is a hard test to run. Don't let 1440p fool you. But 2700-ish average on our FE card. The Astral comes in second to last at just about 2848, right around there is where it kind of hovers on the line. And remember, these are stock out of the box numbers. And that's because that's about how high GPU boost with power draws will allow it to go, even though the power draw on the Astral card was only pulling about 500 watts. It wasn't pulling 600. Sidebar conversation here real quick, just because a card is rated to a number does not mean it automatically will go to that number. You can still have 100% utilization on a GPU without it being 100% power limited. Those are all independent of each other. So sometimes I see people go, I don't understand, my card says it's 98% utilized, but it's only pulling 500 watts, not 600. That's a good thing. You're getting full performance at less power draw and less heat. Why would you want to? You want 600, push the clocks up, then it might happen. In fact, that might be one of the reasons why Steve hates Heaven so much. He feels like it's not a valid test to really pull it or push and cause load on the card. But it's funny, so many SIs have reached out to me and said, don't listen to that horse shit. We use it for various reasons because it does actually expose other problems. As long as you're not using it as a definitive to say a card is stable or not stable by using that one benchmark, which nobody should do anyway, it's fine. And we're gonna continue to use it and we're gonna troll the shit out of it every time just because now. But anyway, I digress. The Lightning Z comes in here at over 2900 megahertz out of the box. Still not exciting. Most 5090s will hit 2900 with very little effort. Most of them will hit it by just doing like a plus 100 on your offset in MSI Afterburner and boom, you're good to go. And yes, we do have 4.6.7 running, which allows us to actually add 100 millivolts, not a percentage offset on the core frequency, or excuse me, the core voltage, a true plus 100 millivolt, allowing me to actually push the card up to 1125 or so millivolts. I complained in my initial video that the card was sitting at about 1045, which was too low. And a lot of you guys said, why aren't you running the latest 4.6.7 beta of MSI Afterburner? I went, well, because when you load Lightning Z's hub, and it has specifically the Afterburner download link in the corner of its own software, and it's downloading 4.6.6. That's just an MSI thing, I guess. I just don't link to the right software. But they went from like bloating the crap out of everything now to just not updating everything, I guess. But 4.6.6 is not appropriate for the Lightning Z. You need 4.6.7 to unlock voltage control, which these tests do use. But anyway, as you can see, just over 2900, never hits 3000. The Matrix, on the other hand, out of the box, stock fan curve, stock everything, touched absolutely nothing, is actually going over 3000 megahertz out of the box. So what we can deduce from this chart is the fact that these cards all have different base clocks built into their BIOS, right? The Matrix is definitely pushing itself. If we go ahead and overclock the cards now, you can see that on the Matrix, I was able to achieve a plus 230 offset and a plus 2750 on the memory. I was running plus 3000, but I was getting strange crashes and periodic soft crashes to desktop happening or freezes. And I wasn't so convinced that it was core. It was actually memory. Dropping the memory down slightly definitely helped. The Founders Edition card, as I said, I did not overclock at all. The Astral was able to gain a plus 285 and a 3000 on the memory. Just because it says plus 285 does not mean it's boosting higher than the Matrix. It just, remember, it has a lower starting point. So plus 285, plus 230, right? They're still far apart from each other, and you can see that on this chart right here. In fact, I was able to push the Astral to about 3135 to 3140 megahertz. That's pretty big, considering the fact that we still are stuck on one cable and 600 watts with no additional power limit to it. The Lightning Z, as you can see, pushed plus 235 to plus 3000, giving us about 3217 megahertz on average. And the Matrix pushed all the way up to just under 3300. In fact, in Cyberpunk, it's a little under 3300. It sits right around 3270 to 3280-ish. It's gonna bend and move around a little bit. In Black Myth, it hits 3315 megahertz all day long, which is crazy. Considering, if you remember, I couldn't get anywhere near 3300 on my Lightning Z with the stock voltage. And yes, even with the plus 100 millivolts, I still can't hit 3300 on this card at all, period. End of story. This is a golden sample probably, and this is an average sample probably. That's what we're kind of leaning towards right here. But let's talk about the power side of it, because that's the other half of this story right here. If we look at power draw, if we look at total board power right here, the Lightning is the most efficient card out of the box. In our 1440p Cyberpunk test right here, it's bouncing between 450 and about 490 watts. That's way less than the 600 it's allowed to pull. And yes, just because it has a 1000 watt BIOS, like I said, does not mean it's going to automatically boost to 1000 watts of power draw. It has 2 plugs, and with us under 500 watts means we were only pulling a little over 215, 220 watts on average per cable, which is pretty damn safe. If we look at our FE card, you can see it even pulled more than the Lightning at over 500 watts on average. If we look at the Astral and the Matrix, they're pretty close to each other at between 550 and about 580 watts for the Matrix on its peak, but then average it drops down to about the mid 500s. None of these cards actually pulled the 600 watts out of the box on 1440p with ray tracing on in a real gaming title that's not a synthetic benchmark, real world scenario right there. But you saw the overclocks I talked about in the frequencies, right? So we only pushed it up a couple hundred megahertz. So you wouldn't expect the power jump to be huge. Unless you're the Lightning Z. This is where it gets a little scary. The FE card didn't move because we didn't overclock it. The Astral card only went up about 50 watts because even though we were able to push the frequency up, because it's not being fully power limited, the frequency stays up to the mid 3100s as we talked about, and still stays under 600 watts until the very end of the test where it starts to spike up a little bit higher. But it averaged a little over 550 watts. The Matrix averaged under 650 watts to get the 3300, just under 3300 frequency we showed you on the previous chart. The Lightning went up to 800 watts just to lose. That is nuts to me. And here's the thing. I checked this, Insanity checked this in all the titles. In all the titles, because every single benchmark is recorded. Every single benchmark. And we don't just write down the number and move on. If I ever have a question, I can go back, pull up that benchmark, throw it in Excel, and completely extrapolate the data to figure out what the hell is happening right here. Every single title. The Lightning is the most efficient at stock and goes well over 700 watts the moment you move the slider. And by the slider, I mean either the voltage or the frequency. It is bonkers how much power it pulls for not an exciting frequency, if you will. It is just absolutely kind of batshit crazy how much power it can draw. If we go ahead and move on now to temperatures though, it's like, what do these temperatures actually do when it comes to the cards? Well, no surprise, the FE is one of the hottest cards. Actually, the Astral's our hottest card, but I'll talk about why in a second here. The FE card is hovering around 70C. The Astral is about 73C. Again, stock clocks. The Astral is extremely conservative with the fan curve. Extremely conservative. Again, this is no touching of the fan curves when it comes to stock. When I go overclock, I max out the fan curves. I go 100%. It's for safety, right? The Astral is very, very, very quiet. And even though it's got such a giant cooler, it's only marginally warmer than the FE, but it's also going several hundred megahertz higher than the FE. So it makes sense it would be a little hotter. The Matrix starts at 40 and then hovers right around, it bounces between like 63 and 65, which is very impressive. It's also liquid metal, something we should point out right now. It's a hybrid liquid metal, but it's still a liquid metal that is in this card. And the Lightning Z is a PTM, which is basically a phase change thermal pad. So once it actually heats up, it will liquefy and then turn into a paste at that point. It is a one-time use though. If you take the cooler off the card and you wipe it clean, you either apply another PTM or regular thermal paste. It's not using any sort of liquid metal or hybrid, which I think is part of its problem in my opinion. But because it is a 360 AIO, and you saw on the previous chart, it was pulling the least amount of power at stock, it makes sense it would be the coldest card at about 52C under load. Still warmer than my card is running at home. My 5090 Astral on a very custom loop with two 420 radiators. Anyway, I do feel like this should have been a 420, if you want to know the truth, but it definitely would have limited the cases it would have fit in. But when you push those overclocks, like I just said, this is what you get. The Matrix and the Astral dropped down to the coldest cards at just over 50C, with those big overclock numbers. More impressively is the Matrix, as we showed, just under 3300 megahertz, with just a dirty slider change on and a fan max out on MSI Afterburner. The Matrix, or the Lightning Z didn't really change temperature. It definitely changed power. So it's kind of impressive that this 360 was able to cool 750 watts and keep it still right around 55C. It was between 55 and 58C, so we went up about 5C. But we also went up nearly double the power. It's like 80% additional power limit or power draw. So this 360 was like, I don't know what you want from me. 750 watts is a lot for a 360 to try and cool. And don't forget, 1,000 is what it's capable of. None of my tests could actually get it to pull 1,000. That's for XOC. That's reserved for XOC. That's the only way you're ever gonna see that. So it was pretty disappointing that I was unable to get the Lightning Z, which had the most power limit available to it, actual voltage control available to it, and a liquid cooler on it to be the coldest or the fastest. And a lot of it has a lot to do with the screen, but even when unplugging the screen, I could not get it to catch the Matrix because now we're talking about silicon lottery. There's no way to really guarantee that any of these cards are going to boost to astronomical numbers. The Matrix card that we have truly feels like a golden sample, which I will absolutely hang on to because if I decide to do XOC again, I'm a little conflicted on whether I would use the Lightning or the Matrix. Because remember, I was able to achieve for a while there, before the Matrix BIOS came out and the Lightning BIOS came out, I was able to reach top 5 in the world with a personally modified, I soldered onto the EVC controller for the voltage and just learned the nuances of the card and was able to just chicken clock my way right up into the top 5. And then the big BIOS came out and then the real heavy hitters and modders came out and now I'm like number 20 or even lower than that right now. Having 2 plugs available to these cards and this card having a 1,000 watt capability, I feel like this card might shine if you XOC it, right? If you get true VRM coolers on there, you get a LN2 pot on there, you get both connectors plugged in, because I think one of the reasons why the guys that are running the MSI BIOS, even on single plug cards, are sitting higher than me now on the charts, are just because of stable power, if you want to know the truth. I think stable power and 2 plugs has a lot to do with it. In fact, I was able to clock higher and get more stability out of my runs when I took my Astral card off of the PSU that's also supplying power to the system and put it on its own PSU on its own power circuit. So now knowing that being able to do that with 2 plugs would probably be the best of both worlds. But knowing that this card is clocking higher at less power draw tells me that that would probably be the better XOC card. And that's where this card truly is built for. But then it's like, what's the point? You're yanking off the screen, you're yanking off the cooler, you're yanking off the AIO, and you're going down to just a bare PCB. And let's face it, those MSI cards that are at the top of the chart, they're not running this BIOS. They are not on this 1,000 watt BIOS. They are on the secret sauce 2,500 watt BIOS that has come out even since I was on my 1,500 watt BIOS on the Astral. So even then, don't fool yourself. You're not buying a world record overclocking card, even if you get a golden sample, because you are not on the same software that the XOC guys are. We've talked about this. I've showed how even I've had access to things that the public doesn't, and that makes a huge difference. It is not worth $5,090 in any realm of the multiverse, okay? It is just not. The Matrix, however, at $4,000 is still a very hard sell because of the fact that it's just too damn expensive, right? Obviously a 5090 at $2,000 is $500 more than a 4090 was at $1,500, but we also know the FE card is never going to compete in terms of its capability with overclocks and custom designs as any of these cards. But if you look at the charts, are you really gonna feel the few FPS difference that you get between the slowest and the fastest on the chart? You're not. It's bragging rights. It is just literally the enthusiast factor. It is the FOMO. All of that stuff kicks in is why people want these. In fact, I even showed how terrible I felt like the Lightning Z was. And in that video I mentioned I might sell it. Now I feel like I just want to OC it to death to see what happens. Even in this video right now, I guarantee people are gonna email me asking to buy it because they already have. I already showed what a terrible value this is. And people are coming out of the woodworks via text on friends I know in person and emails from people I've never met asking, can I please buy your card? And I just wanna respond, why? Why do you want it so bad? You are talking to the most, as you guys would put it, ungrounded, unrealistic PC enthusiast on the market building overclocked PCs, water-cooled PCs that make no sense whatsoever. I'm telling you this is a stupid card. People are still wanting it. You know what they say? You can always separate a fool from his money. And yeah, I bought it, so whatever. All right, guys, time to get out of here. This also was an opportunity for me to kick off our vamping of our GPU charts. Since there's no GPUs coming out for a while, we've got time to work through them and really start building out those charts. Like I said, I added Baldur's Gate on here. We changed Horizon Zero Dawn. I didn't realize I had targeted FPS on there for scaling, which means as the cards got slower, they got closer to 60 FPS because it kept dropping the base resolution farther and farther to try and achieve 60 FPS, something that Phil was like, yeah, I told you that. Why the fuck didn't you listen to me? By the time I realized it, we were so far down the chart, I couldn't go back. So now that's all been corrected where it's gonna truly scale. I think I'm gonna add RDR2. I want to see if I can find a reliable way to benchmark Resident Evil Requiem and Lightning Requiem. Oh no! It's in a Kachuga. It's a Kapufa. I don't know. Anyway, the screen is a cool thing. It's just obviously it's hitting performance, and that's because of
Lightning McScreen.
Guys, tell me what titles we need to add. I need to get on out of here now. My brain is fried. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I know this video is probably not gonna get a lot of views, but it was eye-opening. The enthusiast market has outpaced me. What does that say? God damn.